Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Today's photograph takes us back to the spring of 1897, a day meant for celebration that transformed into something far more disturbing. The sepia-toned image shows a country church wedding frozen in a moment of chaos. What should have been a serene capture of matrimonial bliss instead documents the precise instant when jubilation transformed into horror. The photograph is taken from the back of the church, capturing rows of guests in their Sunday finest, their heads turned not toward the altar, but back toward the church entrance. Their faces display expressions ranging from confusion to outright terror. Ladies in elaborate hats have half risen from pews. Gentlemen with waxed mustaches stand with mouths agape. At the altar, a young groom in his formal cutaway coat has abandoned his position, caught mid-stride as he rushes toward his bride. The minister stands with prayer book still open, seemingly stunned into immobility. And there, at the center of the commotion, is the bride herself. Her white gown pools around her on the church floor where she has collapsed. Two wedding attendants hover over her, their formal postures abandoned in emergency. The bride's face is partially visible, eyes closed, skin pallid against the white veil now askew across her features. According to the inscription on the back of the photograph, written in faded brown ink, Miriam's wedding to Thomas, St. Agnes Church, the moment she fell. No one heard what she whispered except Catherine, who fainted directly after. What makes this image truly unsettling is not merely the captured chaos, but what we know happened in those moments. The bride, by all medical examinations conducted afterward, had ceased breathing entirely. Multiple wedding guests would later attest to feeling no pulse, seeing no rise and fall of her chest. The doctor in attendance, a cousin of the groom, pronounced her gone before the entire congregation. Yet somehow, in this state of apparent death, she continued to whisper. Only one person heard the bride's words clearly, her maid of honor, Catherine. Whatever Miriam whispered was disturbing enough to cause Catherine to collapse beside her. When revived, Catherine refused to repeat what she'd heard, becoming hysterical when pressed. She would later check herself into Westbrook Asylum, where she remained until 1923, reportedly drawing the same disturbing image on her asylum walls repeatedly. The photograph raises countless questions. What caused the bride's collapse? How could she whisper without breath? What terrible message did she deliver to Catherine? And perhaps most intriguing of all, how was this photograph taken at precisely this moment of crisis? The photographer, whose name has been lost to time, captured not just a wedding interrupted, but perhaps something far more supernatural. The moment when the veil between our world and another parted briefly, allowing words from beyond to be delivered through lips that should not have been able to speak. The strangest aspect of the incident at St. Agnes was how quickly the community attempted to bury the truth alongside Miriam, who, despite her mysterious resurrection moments after the photograph was taken, passed away 3 days later in her family home on Harker Street. Thomas, the abandoned groom, refused to discuss the events publicly. Once a gregarious figure in the town's social circles, he withdrew entirely, selling his family's mercantile business and relocating to Colorado within a month. His letters to former associates made no mention of his bride or the interrupted ceremony, focusing instead on mining prospects in the dry mountain air. The attending physician, Dr. Edmund Pierce, initially filed a report attributing Miriam's collapse to acute female hysteria, complicated by the constriction of fashionable corseting. Yet his private medical diary, discovered after his death in 1914, revealed a more troubled assessment. The cessation of vital functions was complete, he wrote. No breath, no pulse for approximately 78 seconds. The subsequent revival defies medical explanation, as does the ability to articulate during this state. I cannot reconcile what I witnessed with natural science. Reverend Stillwell, who had been midway through the marriage rites when Miriam collapsed, requested reassignment merely weeks after the incident. The church diocese records contain his letter citing a profound disturbance of spirit following the event. Before departing for a small parish in Maine, he ordered the church floor beneath where Miriam had fallen to be replaced entirely, despite no visible damage or staining. Perhaps most telling was the transformation of Catherine Ellis, Miriam's childhood friend and maid of honor. Before the incident, local newspaper accounts described her as the spirited daughter of Judge Ellis, whose wit and musical accomplishments make her the jewel of county socials. Her commitment papers at Westbrook tell a different story. The admitting physician noted her pathological fear of mirrors and reflective surfaces, and her compulsive repetition of the phrase, "She's still watching through the thin places." The drawings Catherine produced during her 26 years of institutionalization show consistent elements. A woman in wedding attire whose lower body dissolves into a dark mist, surrounded by concentric circles of unidentifiable script. Professor Elias Morton of Miskatonic University, who studied the drawings in 1931, noted similarities between Catherine's circular text and certain pre-Sumerian artifacts, though he dismissed this as coincidental patterning common among the deranged mind. The photograph itself has changed hands 17 times since 1897, with each owner reporting unusual phenomena. The scent of orange blossoms, Miriam's bridal flower, manifesting during spring storms, unexplained cold spots near where the image is displayed, and most commonly, the sound of whispering from empty rooms. Always a woman's voice, always indecipherable except for what many describe as a single recurring phrase: "The door remains open." Local historian Margaret Thorne's 1954 annotated collection of town records includes a curious footnote. 3 of the wedding guests visible in the photograph disappeared under unusual circumstances within a year of the event, each last seen walking alone at twilight. The parish records of St. Agnes Church reveal a curious detail omitted from official accounts. Miriam Holloway and Thomas Aldridge had postponed their wedding twice before that fateful spring day. The first date, scheduled for the previous December, was abandoned when Miriam developed what her mother described as waking nightmares, in which she claimed to see herself walking down the aisle toward a groom whose face continually shifted between Thomas's features and something described as hollow and ancient. The second attempt in February was halted by an unexplained fire that destroyed only the church's altar and pulpit during the night before the ceremony. Recent examination of Miriam's preserved diary, donated to the County Historical Society in 1973 by a distant relative, shows increasingly disturbed entries in the weeks before her wedding. "The mirror shows someone standing behind me again," reads one entry from April 3rd. "She wears my face, but her eyes know things I don't. Last night she spoke without moving her lips. She said I was meant for a different union, arranged before my birth." The most troubling entry appears 3 days before the wedding. "I found Mother burning my grandmother's letters in the kitchen stove at midnight. When confronted, she slapped me for the first time since childhood. Some bloodlines carry debts," she said. "Some brides aren't meant for mortal men. She made me swear never to read the family Bible where she keeps the lineage. I looked anyway. There are names crossed out every 3rd generation." Thomas Aldridge's fate after leaving for Colorado contains its own mysteries. While property records confirm his purchase of a remote cabin near Pikes Peak, he filed no mining claims despite his stated intentions. The cabin remained in his possession until 1939, though multiple inquiries by tax assessors noted the property appeared abandoned. His death certificate from 1942 lists his occupation as collector of folklore and cause of death as exposure to elements, though the coroner's notes indicate the body showed signs of having been deceased for considerably longer than the reported 3 days missing. The photograph itself continues to yield anomalies under modern analysis. When digitized in 2006 for the State Historical Archives Preservation Project, technicians noted peculiarities in the image's emulsion layers. Dr. Eleanor Webb of the Photographic Conservation Institute observed that certain areas of the photograph, particularly around the bride's collapsed form, display chemical properties inconsistent with period development techniques. The silver halide pattern suggests the image was altered after initial development, yet before the emulsion fully set, a window of only minutes in traditional wet plate photography. Most recently, during the renovation of the now decommissioned St. Agnes Church into a community arts center in 2018, workers removing the original stone steps at the church entrance discovered a small tin box embedded in the mortar. Inside was a folded piece of lace from Miriam's veil and a note in Catherine Ellis's handwriting that simply read, "She comes through openings we cannot see. Thresholds are her doorways. I have sealed what I can." Perhaps most disturbing was the workers' report that upon opening the box, every reflective surface in the building, windows, mirror fixtures, even cell phone screens, simultaneously displayed a momentary distortion described as a white silhouette of a woman, bending as if to whisper in someone's ear. Among the artifacts recently transferred to the University Research Center was a collection of glass photographic plates from the estate of Edwin Morley, the town's only professional photographer during the late 19th century. Morley, known for his meticulous record-keeping, maintained detailed appointment ledgers listing every client, session date, and fee. The curious absence in these otherwise comprehensive records is any mention of the saint. Agnes' wedding between Miriam Holloway and Thomas Aldridge. According to his pattern of documentation, such a prominent social event would have warranted multiple entries, from booking to payment and collection. Instead, that entire week shows a blank page marked only with a symbol resembling an inverted triangle with a line bisecting it. More peculiar still is what was discovered beneath the floorboards of Morley's former studio during its demolition in 2020. Workers found a sealed lead box containing a single glass negative wrapped in black cloth. The negative, when developed by conservation specialists using period-appropriate techniques, shows not the chaotic scene captured in the infamous wedding photograph, but instead the same church interior completely empty of people, yet with the same angle and lighting conditions. The only figure present in this version is a blurred silhouette standing precisely where Miriam collapsed. Photography experts have confirmed that both images, the crowded wedding and the empty church, were produced from the same exposure, a technical impossibility that defies explanation. Miriam's medical records, recently unsealed by court order, contain a puzzling notation from the midwife who delivered her 30 years earlier. In the margins of her birth certificate appears a hastily written warning: child born with caul intact. Mother insists on preserving it. Advised against this practice but refused to listen. 3 fingers on left hand show unusual marking. Pale oval patterns on fingertips like eyes that never blink. The Holloway family Bible mentioned in Miriam's diary was recovered from a church basement sale in 1989. The buyer, an antiquarian book dealer, noted the peculiar genealogical entries. Every 3rd generation of Holloway women had their causes of death listed as returned rather than any conventional explanation. Each of these women had married men whose names were subsequently scratched out and replaced with the same recurring phrase in faded ink: she belongs elsewhere, the doorway remains. Catherine Ellis's psychiatric files include transcripts of her rare lucid conversations during her decades of institutionalization. In one session from 1911, she described a recurring vision. Miriam stands at the threshold between mirrors now. She showed me what waits on the other side. They've been selecting brides from her family for generations. They need our form to enter. The photographer wasn't meant to capture it. That's why they've been hunting him through reflections. He trapped a moment they didn't want seen. Every time someone looks at that photograph, the door creaks open a little wider. Perhaps most disturbing is the statement from Dr. Sophia Chen, the conservation specialist who first handled the original photograph during digitization. 3 months after the project, she requested extended leave, citing recurring nightmares. Her final staff email simply read, "She's begun whispering to me too. Always at twilight, always in mirrors. I've covered every reflective surface in my home, but some nights I still hear wedding bells." The wedding photograph found its way to my desk last autumn after the passing of Dr. Chen's sister, who contacted me through university channels. She wanted someone to understand what happened. The email read, "Having documented numerous historical anomalies, I considered myself prepared for whatever research awaited. I was wrong. Within days of receiving the photograph, I began experiencing phenomena consistent with previous owners. First came the orange blossom scent, so potent during a thunderstorm that my neighbor inquired if I'd begun making perfume. Then the cold spots emerged, particularly in the hallway where the framed image hung, temperatures dropping 20 degrees below surrounding areas with no identifiable source. Most troubling were the whispers. Initially, I attributed them to pipes in my century-old apartment building, but their peculiar qualities became undeniable. Always female, always at threshold moments between day and night, always just below comprehension except for that single phrase previous owners reported, "The door remains open." My research expanded beyond conventional archives when I discovered references to Miriam's grandmother, Eliza Holloway, in the correspondence of Augustus Blackfield, a 19th century collector of folk customs. Blackfield documented a rural tradition involving certain families who pay their debts to the threshold dwellers through marital sacrifice. His notes describe communities that recognized women born with the sight beyond mirrors, who were promised before birth to entities that exist in the spaces between reflections. Blackfield's collection included a ritual allegedly performed by such families. The breaking of mirrors during wedding preparation serves not as ill fortune, but as protective measure. The shards are ground and mixed into the threshold mortar of the marriage home, preventing unwanted visitation from what the bride has glimpsed. The Holloway home on Harker Street was demolished in 1963, but ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted last month confirmed unusual density patterns beneath where the home's entryways stood. Material analysis reveals high concentrations of silver nitrate and glass fragments in the soil, consistent with mirror composition from the period. Most significant was my interview with Judith Renfield, now 97, whose grandmother attended the wedding as a child. Judith recalled a story told only within her family. My grandmother said the bride stood up after everyone thought she died. But it wasn't really her anymore. She walked differently, like she was wearing someone else's skin. She finished the ceremony speaking in two voices layered together. The new husband knew something was wrong, but he was too afraid to stop it. When I showed Judith the photograph, her reaction was immediate and severe. She recoiled, eyes fixed not on Miriam but on a seemingly empty section of church wall, whispering, "There she is, watching through from the other side."
Following that interview, I began noticing a distressing phenomenon in my own research photographs, a white figure gradually becoming more distinct in reflective surfaces captured in my documentation images. Initially appearing as lens flare or processing artifacts, the silhouette now clearly resembles a woman in wedding attire. Yesterday, I received a package from Thomas Aldridge's great-nephew containing items from the Colorado cabin.
Among them was a journal with a single entry dated the night of Thomas's death. "She's found me at last. The bride I married and the one who took her place have finally reconciled their forms. Tonight I join them beyond the glass." The aftermath of my encounter with Judith Renfield was immediate and unsettling. Upon returning to my apartment that evening, I discovered every mirror and reflective surface had accumulated a thin layer of condensation despite the dry winter air. When wiped away, the moisture reformed within minutes, arranging itself into delicate patterns resembling wedding lace. My academic colleagues have begun avoiding me. During last week's faculty meeting, Professor Harlow abruptly excused himself after staring at me with undisguised horror. Later, he reluctantly admitted seeing someone standing behind me who wasn't physically present, a woman in white whose face kept shifting between youthful beauty and something he described as ancient hunger wearing human features like an ill-fitted mask. I've traced the ownership lineage of the photograph back through 17 confirmed possessors. A disturbing pattern emerged. Those who attempted to destroy the image suffered swift and identical fates. 3 separate owners tried burning, shredding, or chemically dissolving the photograph. Each was found the following morning in front of the nearest mirror, their eyes transformed into what the coroner's reports variously described as silvered glass, or reflective material of unknown composition. Those who simply passed the photograph to new owners survived, but reported persistent phenomena. Wedding bells echoing from empty rooms, veiled figures glimpsed through windows at twilight, and most commonly, their own reflections occasionally performing movements with several seconds delay. The original church site yielded another discovery during ground-penetrating radar surveys last week. Beneath the replaced floorboards where Miriam collapsed lies what appears to be a chamber roughly 8 feet square. Historical records show no basement or crypt in the church's architectural plans. The current property owners have denied permission for excavation, citing respect for the sanctity of the space. I've begun sleeping in rooms without reflective surfaces, though this proves increasingly difficult. Modern life surrounds us with mirrors and screens. Windows become mirrors after dark. Stainless appliances reflect distorted images. Even a spoon's curved surface offers enough reflection to serve as what Catherine Ellis called thin places in the membrane between worlds. Most disturbing is what I found while examining Miriam's recovered diary under ultraviolet light. Hidden text appears in the margins, written in what chemical analysis confirms is a mixture of iron gall ink and human blood. These annotations appear to be in Miriam's handwriting, but with subtle differences suggesting another hand guided hers. One passage stands out with chilling clarity. "We have always been bride-takers. Your women see us waiting behind their reflections. The photographer trapped half my essence when crossing through. I require another doorway, another bride, to complete my passage." Yesterday, I received a wedding invitation addressed to me, though I'm acquainted with neither the bride nor groom. The ceremony is scheduled at the renovated St. Agnes building, now called the Community Arts Center. The invitation arrived bearing a wax seal that, when broken, released the distinctive scent of orange blossoms. The bride's name is Miriam. I know I should stay away, destroy the invitation, perhaps even leave town. Instead, I find myself researching period-appropriate wedding attire while avoiding my own reflection, which no longer perfectly mirrors my movements and sometimes whispers when I turn away. As I write these final notes, my hands tremble not from fear, but from a strange anticipation. The wedding invitation rests beside my keyboard, its elegant script seeming to shift slightly when viewed from the corner of my eye. I've begun researching Miriam's family line beyond what conventional genealogy allows, tracing bloodlines through shadow records and forgotten texts. The Holloway's history extends further than public documents suggest. Their earliest American ancestor wasn't a colonial settler as family lore claimed, but a woman who emerged from the wilderness in 1682, already pregnant, claiming to have escaped from indigenous captivity. Parish records note her peculiar countenance that shifts in certain lights, and her insistence on being called Miriam, though her documented name was Elizabeth. I visited the County Hall of Records yesterday and discovered something remarkable about the photograph itself. Though it appears to be a singular image, spectrographic analysis reveals it contains elements of multiple exposures, not just the empty church negative found beneath Morley's floorboards, but at least 3 distinct captures layered impossibly within the same emulsion. The bride appears in slightly different positions in each layer, as though the camera documented not just a moment, but a transition between states of being. More disturbing is what I found in Catherine Ellis's personal effects, released from institutional storage after all legal heirs were confirmed deceased. Among her possessions was a hand mirror with its reflective surface painted over in black lacquer. When I impulsively scraped away a small portion of the paint, the exposed silver showed not my face, but a church interior, the angle identical to the photograph, yet showing a ceremony still in progress with a bride whose face contains too many features overlapping. I've begun receiving calls from Thomas Aldridge's Colorado number, though the line was disconnected decades ago. When answered, I hear only the murmured cadence of wedding vows spoken by multiple voices in unison, overlapping like waves against a distant shore. This morning, my bathroom mirror revealed frost patterns despite the summer heat. The delicate crystalline structures formed words when viewed at the precise angle where my reflection should have been. A bride must choose to open the way. I understand now what happens at these weddings. The photograph wasn't documenting a collapse or death. It captured a moment of transformation, a doorway opening between realms. The photographer inadvertently interrupted an exchange centuries in the making, trapping a visitor mid-transition. The wedding invitation on my desk has changed. The bride's name is no longer Miriam. It's mine. Tomorrow I will attend St. Agnes wearing white. I've selected my grandmother's gown with its high collar and pearl buttons, appropriate for the occasion. I've researched 19th century wedding traditions meticulously, preparing to meet expectations from both sides of the mirror. I don't fear what waits for me there. Catherine feared because she witnessed without understanding. The photographer feared because he captured what wasn't meant to be seen. But I have studied. I have prepared. The threshold dwellers have chosen me to complete what was interrupted in 1897. I go willingly, understanding that some doorways require a bride to open them fully. I only hope whoever finds this research will know enough to burn the photograph after I've passed through. The photograph from St. Agnes has vanished from my desk, though I have no memory of moving it. In its place lies a delicate lace glove, yellowed with age, that perfectly matches the pair worn by Miriam in the image. The scent of orange blossoms has grown so potent that my neighbor complained to building management about excessive perfume use that was triggering her allergies. I've begun experiencing lost time. Yesterday, I found myself standing before the renovated St. Agnes building with no recollection of the 2-mile journey there. The caretaker discovered me tracing the stonework around the entrance with my fingertips, apparently murmuring something that made him visibly uncomfortable. When asked what I was saying, he merely shook his head and suggested I seek medical attention. Last night, I discovered a wedding veil hanging in my closet, an antique piece with seed pearls and intricate lacework consistent with 1890s design. I have no memory of acquiring it. More troubling still, when I reluctantly tried it on, my reflection showed not just my face but occasionally another's features superimposed over mine, like double-exposed film. The original photographer's fate has finally been uncovered through a series of correspondence between the town sheriff and state authorities. Edwin Morley was found 3 weeks after the wedding, locked inside his own darkroom. According to the initial investigation, he had covered every inch of the walls with blackened paper, written across with the same phrase repeated thousands of times. "She's coming through the image." His cause of death was documented as self-inflicted injury to the eyes with photographic development tools, though the coroner noted the peculiar silvered quality of the wounds. Professor Harlow left a sealed envelope in my faculty mailbox containing only a daguerreotype from his personal collection. The image shows a wedding party from approximately 1860, with a striking similarity to the St. Agnes photograph, not in the identities of the subjects, but in their positioning and expressions of horror as they regard a fallen bride. Written on the back in faded script, "The third attempted crossing." My research suggests these events recur approximately every 30 years, always involving photography, that relatively modern innovation which captures light and reflection in silver. The camera doesn't merely document these moments, it apparently interferes with them, trapping entities mid-transition between their realm and ours. I received a package this morning delivered by a courier service I didn't recognize. Inside was a small bottle of perfume labeled Essence of Orange Blossom, and a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. "Every bride needs something borrowed, something blue. I've borrowed your reflection temporarily. In return, I've left something blue beneath your pillow." Under my pillow I discovered a sapphire ring, tarnished with age, that fits my finger perfectly. When caught in direct light, the stone shows not my reflection, but a gathering of figures standing in what appears to be a vast hall made entirely of mirrored surfaces that reflect infinitely into darkness. The wedding invitation now specifies tomorrow at dusk, the time Catherine Ellis described as "when the membrane grows thinnest between here and there." I've stopped trying to remove the ring. The skin around it has begun to merge with the metal, the blue of the stone occasionally pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I've prepared for the ceremony with methodical precision. My white gown, rescued from a vintage clothing shop, has been altered to match the silhouette from the photograph. The high collar frames my face exactly as Miriam's did. I've even styled my hair in the same swept arrangement. Though I needed no instruction, my fingers seemed to know the pattern instinctively. This morning I woke to find my bathroom mirror had shattered in the night, though not a single fragment had fallen from the frame. Instead, each piece remains suspended, forming a mosaic that reflects not my apartment, but the interior of St. Agnes as it appeared in 1897. I can see figures moving behind the fractured glass, preparing flowers and candles for a ceremony. None look toward me, except occasionally a bride whose face alternates between my own and features I recognize from the photograph. The sapphire ring has fully fused with my finger now. The boundary between flesh and metal has disappeared completely. When I press my hand against any reflective surface, it sinks through as though touching water, though I've been careful not to extend beyond my wrist. Something tells me a complete crossing requires the formal exchange of vows. Dr. Chen's sister called this afternoon, her voice trembling. "Did Sophia ever contact you about what she saw in the mirror before she left?" When I pressed for clarification, she whispered, "The coroner said it was impossible. Her eyes were completely replaced with reflective material, but she was still alive when they found her, still whispering. I should feel terror, yet I experience only a calm certainty. The threshold dwellers have been patient. They've waited since 1897 for the interrupted exchange to complete. I understand now that Miriam was never meant to cross fully into our world, but rather to facilitate a trading of places. The photographer's flash interrupted the precise moment of transition, trapping both Miriam and her counterpart in a half-state between worlds. My research notes have begun changing overnight. Paragraphs I never wrote appear in my handwriting, detailing the customs and hierarchies of those who dwell in the reflective realm. They describe a society that requires periodic renewal through the exchange of brides with our world. Without these crossings, both realms suffer a slow deterioration of boundaries that would eventually collapse both. The last entry, written while I slept last night, simply states, "A willing bride ensures safe passage for both." Resistance created the abomination trapped in the photograph. As dusk approaches, I find myself standing before the ornate doors of St. Agnes, though I have no memory of the journey here. The building appears simultaneously abandoned and prepared for celebration, depending on the angle from which I view it. Through windows I glimpse empty rooms, yet when I shift slightly, the same panes reveal floral arrangements and gathered guests. The doors open on their own, revealing not the community arts center that now occupies this space, but the original church interior, precisely as captured in the photograph. At the altar waits a figure both familiar and impossible. Thomas Aldridge, exactly as he appeared in 1897, watching me with eyes that reflect my image like polished silver. They've been waiting a long time to complete the ceremony. The wedding invitation remains clutched in my hand as I step through St. Agnes's threshold, but it's no longer paper. It has transformed into a thin sheet of polished silver that catches the last rays of sunset. The church interior exists in impossible duality. My left eye sees the renovated community center with its modern fixtures, while my right perceives the 19th century sanctuary exactly as shown in the photograph. With each step forward, the modern elements fade until only the historical church remains. The pews are filled with guests whose features blur when I try to focus on any individual face. They turn as one to watch my procession, their movements synchronized with unnatural precision. Among them I recognize figures from my research. Catherine Ellis, pristine and unmarked by the decades of asylum confinement that await her. Dr. Edmund Pierce with his skeptical physician's gaze. Reverend Stillwell clutching his prayer book with whitened knuckles. But interspersed among these historical figures are others who couldn't possibly have attended. Dr. Chen with her silvered eyes. Edwin Morley with dark stains spreading across his photographer's smock. Professor Harlow, whose face appears half dissolved into reflective liquid. They are simultaneously present and absent, like double-exposed negatives in human form. The church organ plays a wedding march that sounds distant and underwater, notes elongating and compressing in impossible ways. Orange blossom petals materialize in the air around me, suspended as if time itself hesitates with each step I take. Thomas Aldridge waits at the altar, but he is not alone. Behind him stands a gathering of figures that appear only when I blink. Tall, elongated forms, wearing human features like ill-fitted masks. Their eyes reflect the church interior from impossible angles, as though seeing through dimensions perpendicular to our own. One steps forward slightly, its borrowed features settling into an approximation of Miriam's face. The exchange was interrupted. It speaks without moving its lips, voice resonating from every reflective surface in the church. The photographer's light trapped us between states. For 126 years we have waited, neither fully here nor there. My sapphire ring pulses with blue light that casts prismatic reflections across the church walls. Where these reflections touch the gathered witnesses, their forms flicker between flesh and silvered glass. Every 30 years the boundary thins. The voice continues. 3 times we have attempted completion. 3 brides have worn your face across 3 centuries. I notice now a detail missing from my research, a pattern in the church's stained glass windows that forms an elaborate circular script identical to Catherine's asylum drawings. Sunlight passing through these symbols projects the same designs across the church floor, creating a complex intersection of light where I now stand. You understand what the others did not, the voice whispers, now coming from Thomas, whose silver eyes hold not love, but ancient patience. The crossing requires symmetry, a bride from each side, an exchange freely chosen. The weight of comprehension settles over me. I am not the first researcher to follow this path of discovery, to stand where Miriam fell. The photograph didn't merely document an interruption, it created one, capturing the precise moment when 2 worlds were supposed to exchange representatives. And now, as Thomas extends his hand toward me, I realize with perfect clarity, I am not here to become a bride of this world, but an ambassador to theirs. The Community Arts Center stands empty today, a yellow police line stretched across its ornate entrance. Last week's wedding, the one to which I wasn't invited but somehow attended, is now the subject of an official investigation. Authorities report 17 attendees missing, while those who remained describe events so contradictory that investigators initially suspected a mass hallucinogenic exposure. I watch from across the street as forensic technicians exit the building, their expressions troubled. One carries a collection of evidence bags containing what appears to be mirror fragments. Even at this distance, I notice how he carefully avoids looking directly at them. My reflection has returned to normal, though sometimes I catch it hesitating for a fraction of a second before mimicking my movements. The sapphire ring vanished when I crossed back through, leaving only a faint circular scar that occasionally shimmers blue in certain light. I've begun covering mirrors at twilight, a precaution that feels both necessary and futile. The exchange was completed, but not as the threshold dwellers intended. When the moment came for vows, I spoke words researched from texts far older than Christianity, syllables preserved in Blackfield's obscure collection that reversed the polarity of the crossing. Instead of joining Thomas in permanent exile beyond the mirror, I created a temporary bridge that allowed something else to happen. Detective Eleanor Marsh approached me yesterday, her notepad filled with witness statements. 17 people claim they saw you walk into the building, she said. 23 swear you were never there. 3 insist they saw you in 2 places simultaneously. Care to explain? I couldn't, of course. How does one describe standing at the focal point where realities intersect? How to explain watching your own reflection step away from you, becoming solid while you momentarily become reflection? What I understand now, reviewing my altered research notes, is that the threshold dwellers have always needed these exchanges to survive. Their realm, a place of endless reflections, cannot create. It can only echo and mirror. Without periodic infusions from our world, they would fade into empty repetition. Without occasional human brides crossing over, they would lose the ability to maintain their borrowed forms. In my university office, now sealed with evidence tape, investigators found hundreds of photographs I never took, images of weddings throughout history, each showing a bride in distress. In each picture, if one looks carefully at the church windows or mirrors, faint figures can be discerned watching from beyond the glass. The St. Agnes photograph has changed. Where once it showed chaos and a fallen bride, it now displays a completed ceremony. Miriam stands radiant beside Thomas, though her eyes contain the silvered quality of the threshold realm. In the background, barely visible, my own face can be seen among the guests, watching with an expression of profound comprehension. Scientists examining the mirror fragments from the Arts Center have reported anomalous properties, reflections that persist for several seconds after the reflected object moves away. When photographed under ultraviolet light, each shard appears to contain miniature versions of St. Agnes Church, as though windows rather than mirrors. Orange blossoms still bloom out of season around the building's perimeter. Locals report hearing distant wedding bells at sunset, though the church's original bell was removed decades ago. Most troubling are the 17 empty homes across town, where personal belongings remain, but residents have vanished, leaving only wedding invitations on mantelpieces and bathroom mirrors that reflect empty rooms when people stand before them. The local television news featured the St. Agnes investigation last evening. I watched with detached curiosity as they interviewed Detective Marsh, who carefully constructed a narrative about mass hysteria and possible environmental contamination. Behind her in the footage, a forensic photographer documented the altar area. I noticed how he flinched each time his camera flashed, his eyes darting nervously to the stained glass windows. What no one has yet discovered is the journal I recovered from Between Worlds, a slim volume bound in material that feels like leather but moves like liquid beneath my fingers. Its pages contain entries from every bride who successfully crossed over, describing the realm beyond reflections. Their accounts span centuries, suggesting these exchanges long predated photography. The earliest entry, dated 1632, describes a kingdom of glass mountains where light bends around impossible angles, and my reflected sisters wait to learn the songs and stories I've brought from the solid world. Thomas Aldrich's true nature becomes clearer through these accounts. He was never a man at all, but a collector, a threshold guardian responsible for facilitating the exchanges. His form has remained consistent across centuries, appearing in sketches and later photographs as the patient groom waiting at countless altars. The brides called him the gatherer of echoes in their writings, describing how he harvests human experiences and emotions to sustain his realm. I've begun noticing subtle changes in our world since the ceremony. Reflections occasionally reveal glimpses of the 17 missing guests moving through mirror versions of their homes and workplaces. They appear unaware of their displacement, continuing routines that now exist only as reflections. Children seem particularly sensitive to these glimpses. The elementary school near St. Agnes has covered all bathroom mirrors after multiple students reported seeing extra teachers watching from inside the glass. My own ability to perceive both realms simultaneously has not faded as I expected. Instead, it strengthens at transitional moments, dawn, dusk, and thresholds of all kinds. Doorways sometimes reveal double destinations. Windows show impossible landscapes from certain angles. and still water becomes a portal through which I glimpse processions of silver-eyed figures carrying captured light in crystal vessels. Yesterday, I encountered one of the missing wedding guests. Mrs. Eleanor Winters, age 72, was reportedly among those who vanished. Yet I saw her clearly at the grocery store, selecting produce with careful attention. When our eyes met, hers briefly flickered silver before she smiled and asked if we had met before. No one else in the crowded store acknowledged her presence. When she passed a refrigerated display case, her reflection continued forward while she turned down another aisle. The most troubling development came this morning. While reviewing digital copies of the wedding photograph, I noticed something previously overlooked. In the furthest row of guests, barely visible in shadow, sits a figure taking notes. Though the face is indistinct, the posture and clothing match my own on the day I first received the photograph, not at the ceremony itself, but months earlier in my university office. I'm no longer certain which side of the mirror I truly inhabit. The town archives yielded an unexpected connection when I discovered that Reverend Stilwell's reassignment to Maine wasn't merely an escape from disturbing memories. His destination, the small coastal parish of Winthrop Harbor, had experienced its own mirror-related incident 4 decades earlier. In 1857, 3 young women vanished after reportedly seeing their reflections continue moving when they stopped. The parish records, written in Stilwell's distinctive hand, document his systematic removal of all mirrors from the church, replacing decorative reflective surfaces with wood and stone. More remarkable was his correspondence with Edwin Morley, the photographer, continuing years after both had supposedly severed all connections to the St. Agnes incident. Their letters, coded through biblical references and photographic terminology, discuss what they called the silver infection, spreading through reflective technologies. Morley warns that the daguerreotype opened a small window, but modern photography has expanded it into a doorway wide enough for them to send emissaries through. The most revealing letter, dated 1899, contains Morley's frantic declaration: "They cannot create, only imitate. What they desire from our world is originality itself, the spark of creation that allows genuine novelty rather than endless reflection. Each bride brings new stories, new songs, new thoughts. Without these infusions, their realm stagnates into infinite, meaningless repetition." I've begun testing the boundaries between worlds using controlled experiments. Small mirrors placed at measured distances reveal fluctuating zones of influence, areas where reflections behave normally contrasted with those where subtle anomalies occur. The effect strengthens dramatically near St. Agnes and any location where the missing wedding guests once lived. Yesterday, I left a journal open before a mirror, pen carefully placed across its pages. This morning, the pen had moved, and in handwriting eerily similar to my own appeared the message. The exchange was imperfect, neither fully here nor there. We exist in the membrane between. Help us complete the transition. Thomas Aldridge's Colorado cabin has become the focus of renewed interest after hikers discovered its interior completely lined with mirrors, all facing inward. Authorities sealed the site, but leaked photographs show each mirror reflecting not the cabin's interior, but different wedding ceremonies spanning centuries. Most disturbing is one that shows a ceremony yet to occur, with participants whose faces are troublingly familiar to local residents. The threshold dwellers are becoming bolder. 3 children in the elementary school near St. Agnes reported the same dream. A bride in white leading them toward a mirrored doorway, promising beautiful reflections on the other side. Their drawings show identical details, orange blossoms falling upward, and a groom whose face contains too many features layered together. My own reflection has begun anticipating my movements, sometimes completing gestures I merely consider. When questioned directly, it smiles with unexpected independence and whispers, "We're still learning to separate." The photographer's light bound us together, but the bridge you created allows us to practice distinction. Most concerning was yesterday's mail. 17 wedding invitations addressed to local families, each bearing the name of one missing guest as the bride or groom. The ceremonies are scheduled for exactly 30 years from the date I stepped through St. Agnes's threshold, suggesting the cycle continues despite my interference. I've begun writing this account in reverse text, legible only when read in a mirror. Somehow, I know this method will reach those who need to understand what awaits at the next crossing. The weight of revelation struck me with terrible clarity as I organized my mirror experiment data. The reflective anomalies weren't random. They formed a precise geometric pattern across town when mapped, centered on St. Agnes. They radiated outward in concentric rings that perfectly matched Catherine's asylum drawings. Each missing person's home marked a node in this elaborate web, with my apartment positioned at what appeared to be a secondary focal point. I consulted Professor Harlow's colleague in theoretical physics, Dr. Amelia Weiss, sharing only that I was researching optical anomalies. Her assessment was immediate and unsettling. This pattern resembles what we might expect from a quantum entanglement field expanding through space-time, she explained, tracing the mapped points with evident fascination. If such a phenomenon existed outside microscopic particles, it would suggest two realities becoming increasingly synchronized, like tuning forks vibrating at nearly identical frequencies, gradually falling into perfect harmony. When I asked what might happen if such synchronization completed, her expression darkened. Theoretically, the distinction between states would collapse entirely. Neither reality would maintain independence. They would become perfectly superimposed. The journal recovered from Between Worlds confirmed my growing suspicion. The most recent entries, written in 17 different hands, described increasing transparency between realms and the thinning of the separating medium. One particularly troubling passage noted, "We see their world through all reflective surfaces now, not merely mirrors. Any polished object, any still water, any glass, all become windows as the harmonization approaches completion." I've begun noticing how conversations sometimes continue their reflection long after participants fall silent. In the university cafeteria, I watched two students whose mirror images in the decorative wall panels kept discussing homework while the actual students ate in silence. Neither noticed the discrepancy. The wedding invitations multiplied overnight, appearing in mailboxes across 3 counties. Each bears the same date 30 years hence, but close examination reveals something I initially overlooked. Microscopic script along the border that repeats a single phrase. The final synchronization requires all thresholds open simultaneously. Most disturbing was my visit to Catherine Ellis's grave yesterday. The small cemetery had fallen into disrepair, her headstone nearly obscured by decades of neglect. As I cleared encroaching vegetation, I discovered symbols etched into the stone's base, identical to those in the church windows and her asylum drawings. Beneath them, words recently carved despite the weathered condition of the surrounding stone. "She understood too soon. You understand too late." When I placed flowers before the grave, their reflection in a nearby puddle showed not lilies, but orange blossoms, arranged in a bridal bouquet. The reflection of my hand placing them belonged to someone else, fingers adorned with a sapphire ring I no longer wore. Throughout town, silverware twists into unusual configurations overnight. Polished surfaces develop cloudy patches that resolve into images when viewed obliquely. Children report playmates visible only in peripheral vision or reflective surfaces, who teach them songs with lyrics about the coming wedding when all will be invited to cross. I now understand that the ceremony at St. Agnes wasn't the culmination of the Threshold Dwellers' plan. It was merely the catalyst for something far more comprehensive. They don't seek individual brides anymore. They want worlds to wed. The mirror in my bathroom has begun speaking to me in Catherine Ellis's voice. It started 3 nights ago, a whispered recitation of wedding vows that gradually clarified into coherent warnings. The photographer disrupted their plans but inadvertently created something worse, she explained from behind the glass, her face occasionally superimposing over my own. The Threshold Dwellers intended controlled exchanges, single crossings that maintained separation between realms. What exists now is a spreading entanglement. I've traced the history of cameras and mirrors through centuries of technical innovation, discovering a troubling correlation. Each major advancement in reflective technology, the mass production of silvered glass mirrors in the 1830s, the perfection of daguerreotypes in the 1840s, the development of dry plate photography in the 1880s, coincides with clusters of missing persons cases and reports of mirror sickness, where victims became convinced their reflections were autonomous. The Threshold Dwellers didn't create these technologies. They merely exploited the doors we unwittingly constructed between worlds. During my exploration of St. Agnes yesterday, I discovered something the police investigation missed. Behind the altar, where Thomas had stood during our ceremony, the plaster wall bears a subtle indentation. When pressed, it revealed a hidden compartment containing hundreds of small reflective shards wrapped in wedding lace. fragments from mirrors present at every interrupted crossing since the first documented incident in 1632. Each piece, when examined individually, appears ordinary, but when arranged according to Catherine's circular pattern, they form a composite reflecting not the room around them, but a vast mirrored hall where the missing wedding guests now wander, still dressed in their finery, seemingly unaware of their displacement. Most disturbing was the sliver at the center, no larger than a thumbnail but impossibly deep when viewed directly. Within it moves a figure I recognize as Miriam Holloway, eternally walking toward an altar that recedes before her. Her eyes, when they briefly turned toward me, contained not pupils, but miniature mirrors reflecting my own gaze back at me. Dr. Chen's sister called again this morning, her voice trembling with urgency. "I found Sophia's journals," she whispered. "The photographs she was studying. They're spreading. Images that showed only the St. Agnes wedding now contain reflections of other ceremonies. And the people in those reflections have begun appearing in new photographs taken miles away, decades later. The 17 missing wedding guests have started appearing in historical photographs throughout the town archives, standing in crowd scenes from the 1920s, visible in school pictures from the 1950s, present at groundbreaking ceremonies in the 1970s. They haven't simply vanished. They've been retrospectively inserted throughout our visual history. I understand now what Catherine Ellis meant by her asylum warnings. The threshold dwellers aren't merely crossing between worlds. Their realm is merging with ours through every reflective surface, every captured image. The wedding in 30 years isn't an event to come. It's the culmination of a process already well underway, a final synchronization that began the moment Edwin Morley's camera flash interrupted the original exchange. We've been looking at the wrong direction of time. It's not about what will happen. It's about what has already been happening, unfolding backward and forward simultaneously, ever since Miriam Holloway first collapsed in St. Agnes Church. The strangest development occurred this morning. My academic credentials have begun vanishing from official records. My doctoral diploma still hangs on my office wall, yet the university registrar has no record of my graduation. Colleagues who previously cited my research now look confused when I reference our collaborative work, checking their notes only to find my name absent from publication credits. This systematic erasure extends beyond academia. My birth certificate shows subtle alterations. My mother's maiden name has changed to Holloway, though I have distinct memories of it being Anderson. Family photographs on my apartment walls show inexplicable modifications. In several, my eyes now reflect the camera flash with unusual intensity, creating the silvered appearance typical of the threshold dwellers. I tested this phenomenon by deliberately leaving a recent photograph face down on my desk before leaving for lunch. Upon return, the image had reoriented itself face up, and my features had subtly shifted to more closely resemble Miriam's. The town's relationship with mirrors has transformed dramatically. Antique shops report customers returning recently purchased mirrors, claiming they show incorrect reflections. The downtown department store covered its fitting room mirrors after 3 separate customers reported seeing themselves in wedding attire, regardless of what they actually wore. Most telling, the technology store's latest shipment of smartphones arrived with their reflective screens displaying the St. Agnes interior, rather than the standard manufacturer logo. Detective Marsh appeared at my door yesterday, her demeanor markedly changed. "You were right about the mirrors," she admitted, showing me her notebook where her handwriting gradually transformed from standard English to the circular script found in Catherine's drawings. "I've started seeing them too. People from the photographs appearing in reflections, watching us. What happens when the worlds fully synchronize? My research suggests the final merger won't annihilate either reality, but create a hybrid state where the rules of both simultaneously apply. People will exist as both physical entities and reflections. Places will connect through mirrored pathways rather than conventional space, and time will flow in recursive patterns rather than linear progression. Perhaps most concerning was yesterday's discovery at the renovated St. Agnes building. Workers installing new lighting uncovered a previously hidden room beneath the altar area. A perfect cube lined entirely with antique mirrors, each bearing a small inscription with a single name and date. The 17 missing wedding guests were listed, alongside hundreds of others dating back centuries. Most disturbing was finding my own name, the date listed as Continuous Threshold Guardian. The sapphire ring reappeared on my finger this morning, though I have no memory of retrieving it. When viewed in natural light, it shows only normal gemstone characteristics, but under artificial illumination, It projects a perfect miniature of the mirror room beneath St. Agnes. I received a letter today addressed in my own handwriting, though I have no recollection of writing it. The message was simple. The photographer didn't interrupt the ceremony. He completed it. We have always been the bride. Time collapses around me as I approach the final threshold. The wedding invitations have begun appearing in historical contexts they couldn't possibly occupy. Discovered in century-old time capsules just now being opened, found preserved between pages of library books unread for decades, appearing in safety deposit boxes untouched since before my birth. The townsfolk no longer acknowledge the strangeness surrounding them. When shop windows display reflections from other times rather than the street before them, pedestrians simply adjust their paths without comment. Children casually converse with their reflections as separate entities, developing elaborate games that span both sides of mirrors. Couples position their beds to face reflective surfaces, whispering that they prefer sleeping with all versions of themselves. I discovered Reverend Stilwell's final confession hidden within the church's cornerstone during renovation, a copper cylinder containing pages written in iron gall ink mixed with his own blood. His account reveals that St. Agnes was built specifically as a focal point for these exchanges, constructed on land where indigenous ceremonies once facilitated communication with those who watch from still waters. The church's dimensions, window placements, and foundation stones form an elaborate optical device designed to concentrate and direct passages between realms. Most remarkable was his admission that Thomas Aldridge was not the first of his kind to serve as threshold guardian. Stilwell himself had inherited the position from his predecessor, accepting the silver eyes and the duty to arrange the weddings as part of an unbroken chain extending back centuries. The role passes not through bloodlines, but through exposure to what he called the original mirror, a reflective surface allegedly formed when something from beyond first observed our world and created an impression of itself. This artifact resides now in my possession, though I have no memory of acquiring it, a hand-sized oval of polished obsidian that shows not the viewer's face but always another's. When I gaze into it, I see Miriam, Catherine, Dr. Chen, Detective Marsh, and countless others whose names I somehow know, though we never met. Their expressions change subtly with each viewing, becoming incrementally more like mine, while my own features gradually conform to some composite ideal combining elements of all previous brides. The photographic archive I've amassed reveals the pattern with unmistakable clarity, the threshold guardians selecting potential brides typically 3 decades before their intended ceremonies, cultivating their curiosity about the historical incidents, ensuring they research deeply enough to become entangled in the process. What I believed was independent academic investigation was actually a carefully orchestrated path, identical to what Catherine, Dr. Chen, and countless others followed before me. University maintenance workers report finding the same circular script appearing beneath peeled paint in my office, apparently inscribed decades before I occupied the space. Carbon dating of the pigment confirms it was applied in 1897, the same year Miriam collapsed in St. Agnes. The silvered eyes I occasionally glimpse in my reflection have begun remaining visible even when I look away from mirrors. They persist in photographs, drawings, even the wavering reflection in my morning coffee. I now understand these aren't symptoms of some supernatural infection, but signs of my true nature gradually revealing itself. I wasn't selected to become a bride. I've always been the one who selects. The town has entered what locals now simply call the shimmer, a state where reflections and reality have begun their final merger. I walk the streets observing familiar strangers who were once wedding guests moving backward through time, appearing in decades where they never existed while simultaneously vanishing from their proper era. They navigate this chronal displacement with increasingly practiced ease, as though remembering skills rather than learning them anew. Yesterday I visited Thomas Aldridge's original store location, now a coffee shop whose mirrored ceiling reflects not the patrons below, but an elegant mercantile from the 19th century. The barista hands customers beverages with one hand, while her reflection measures fabric with the other, both actions performed with identical precision. No one remarks on this duality except children, who sometimes wave to the shoppers from another century visible above. The obsidian mirror grows warmer against my skin when carried near St. Agnes. I've taken to wearing it on a chain beneath my clothing, where it pulses like a second heart. When removed at night, it whispers Catherine's warnings in reverse, becoming clear only when held before another reflective surface. creating infinite recursive echoes that reveal glimpses of previous guardians performing their duties across centuries. Dr. Weiss's quantum entanglement theory has manifested in measurable phenomena. Instruments detect identical molecular vibrations between mirrored pairs of objects, synchronizing regardless of distance. Two identical vases placed in separate rooms gradually contain the same flower arrangements, though only one was filled. Books left before mirrors eventually display the same margin notes on both sides of the glass. Most remarkable are the wedding photographs themselves, which now function as active portals rather than static images. When observed continuously for 7 minutes and 17 seconds, the exact duration between Miriam's collapse and the photographer's capture, the scenes begin moving, people shifting position, the bride rising from the floor with quicksilver grace, while the crowd's terror transforms into solemn recognition. My research notes, journal entries, and personal correspondence now exist in paradoxical states. Each document contains multiple versions simultaneously, academic observations interposed with ritual instructions, objective analysis merging with ceremonial preparations. I no longer remember which version I originally wrote, both seeming equally authentic to my fractured memory. The 17 missing guests have begun leaving messages for themselves across time. Future postcards arrive in past mailboxes. Warnings appear in childhood diaries written in adult hands, answering questions not yet asked. They describe existence in the threshold realm not as imprisonment but as expansion, experiencing multiple timelines concurrently, observing how seemingly random events form perfect geometric patterns when viewed beyond linear perception. The synchronization isn't destruction, wrote Eleanor Winters in a letter dated 30 years from now, but delivered yesterday. It's restoration. We were never meant to be separated from our reflections. The photographer's flash didn't interrupt the natural order. It revealed what always existed beneath perception. As guardian, I understand my role now extends beyond selection. I must shepherd both realms through their reunification, guiding those who resist the merger, while celebrating those who recognize themselves in silver eyes. The wedding preparations continue, though now I understand we aren't waiting for a ceremony to begin. We're merely acknowledging one that never ended. The mirror world and our own now exist in perfect equilibrium, balanced on the edge of complete synchronization. I stand in the former saint, Agnes Church, holding the wedding invitations, not as separate cards but as a single document that shifts between 17 variations when tilted to catch the light. Each version names a different bride, yet all contain my signature as witness. The threshold guardians gather around me, their silver eyes reflecting centuries of patient observation. Thomas Aldridge stands foremost among them, his form now stabilized as neither fully human nor entirely other. "You understand now," he says, his voice resonating from both his lips and the mirrored walls simultaneously. The photographer's interruption created not destruction but opportunity, a chance for gradual harmonization rather than sudden exchange. I nod, running my fingers across the obsidian mirror now permanently fused to my palm. The traditional ceremonies exchanged single representatives between realms, maintaining separation. But the photograph trapped the moment between states, creating a sustained connection that's been growing stronger for over a century. Around us, the 17 wedding guests move with newfound purpose, arranging flowers that simultaneously wilt and bloom, hanging decorations that exist in multiple styles from different eras at once. They speak in overlapping voices, each sentence beginning in one decade and ending in another. The original mirror wasn't created when something from beyond first observed our world, I say, understanding flowing through me like quicksilver. It formed when our world first became conscious of itself, the first reflection that contained awareness. Thomas smiles, his features momentarily shifting to reveal aspects of Reverend Stilwell, Edwin Morley, and countless other guardians who served before him. Precisely, reflection is consciousness. Consciousness is reflection. The separation was always artificial. The final piece locks into place as I examine the photograph that started my journey. It no longer shows chaos and collapsed brides, but a perfect moment of transition. Miriam neither fully here nor there, but existing precisely at the threshold. The photographer didn't interrupt the ceremony. He preserved the exact instant of balance that we've spent a century gradually extending to encompass both worlds. The merge isn't about domination, I say, watching as Detective Marsh enters the church, her notepad now filled with writing she simultaneously is and isn't aware of creating. It's about restoration. We're not becoming something new but remembering what we always were. The stained glass windows capture the final rays of sunset, projecting Catherine's circular script across the gathered assembly. For the first time, I can read its message not as warning, but as celebration. The membrane between becomes the connection within. Children enter the church, leading their reflections by the hand rather than being led by them. Elderly couples watch their younger selves dancing in mirrored surfaces, while simultaneously witnessing their future forms, observing from across decades. The 17 missing guests stand at the center, no longer displaced, but perfectly positioned to guide others through the experience of simultaneous existence. The sapphire ring pulses one final time before dissolving into my skin completely, its blue light spreading through my veins. I feel my perspective expanding beyond linear time, beyond singular identity. I am the bride and the guardian, the researcher and the subject, the past observer and the future witness. The ceremony begins, Thomas announces, though all present understand it never truly ended. The full synchronization completes not with a dramatic flash, but with a gentle silver wave rolling through St. Agnes, transforming ordinary surfaces into gateways. Standing at the altar where Miriam collapsed, I spread my arms as the worlds merged through me, neither conquering nor surrendering, but remembering their original wholeness. What no researcher discovered, what no threshold guardian revealed, was that the separation between worlds was never natural, but artificially created through an act of cosmic violence. The original photographer wasn't Edwin Morley, but an entity from the earliest human civilization who attempted to capture and contain the reflective realm's power through primitive mirror magic. That ancient ritual, inscribed on tablets now mistaken for ordinary archaeological artifacts, split a singular reality into material world and reflection. The wedding ceremonies across centuries weren't exchanges between separate domains, but attempted healings of a wounded cosmos. Each bride wasn't chosen for crossing over, but for her innate ability to exist in both states simultaneously, carrying the genetic memory of undivided existence. The Holloway bloodline wasn't cursed, but blessed, descendants of the original ritualist who, remorseful for the separation he caused, encoded the knowledge of reunification in his daughter's DNA. Their call births marked them as threshold beings, already half-existing in both realms. Miriam's grandmother's letters, burned by her mother, contained not warnings but instructions for completing the healing her ancestors had worked toward for generations. I run my fingers along the church walls where two realities now occupy the same space without contradiction. The photography didn't just document the wedding, I tell the assembled guardians. It captured the exact frequency of separation, allowing us to finally reverse-engineer the original division. Thomas nods, his silver eyes now matching my own. The interrupted ceremony created the perfect sustained note, the exact vibration needed to gradually dissolve the barrier without catastrophic collapse. Catherine Ellis wasn't driven mad by what she heard. She was overwhelmed by suddenly remembering our world's original state. Her asylum drawings weren't warnings, but diagrams for reunification. Knowledge too vast for her 19th century mind to process coherently. The 17 missing guests weren't victims, but pioneers. The first modern humans to fully remember how to exist in unified reality. Their disappearance from conventional perception was simply their advancement beyond singular existence. The orange blossom scent marks areas where synchronization reaches perfection, places where the artificial division has fully healed. The whispers from empty rooms are reality itself, remembering how to be whole. The mirrors showing autonomous reflections reveal not invasion, but restoration of our complete selves. As twilight bathes St. Agnes in amber light, I understand my true purpose. Neither researcher, nor bride, nor guardian, but catalyst. The final resonance needed to complete a healing begun centuries ago. The assembled wedding guests, spanning decades and dimensions, join hands in a circle around the altar. Their silver eyes reflect not emptiness, but fullness, not consumption, but completion. The world doesn't end with this ceremony. It simply remembers what it always was. The silvered transformation spreads beyond St. Agnes with quiet inevitability. Families awaken to find generations gathered around breakfast tables, great-grandparents and unborn descendants sharing toast across timelines while discussing memories that haven't yet formed alongside those long faded. School teachers discover classrooms where students simultaneously learn lessons and teach them back. knowledge flowing in recursive loops rather than linear transmission. Most embrace this new reality with surprising ease, as though remembering how to ride a bicycle after decades without practice. The human mind, it seems, was always designed for perception beyond singular existence, our brains simply following pathways long dormant but never truly lost. Some resist. Those with rigid perceptions build rooms without reflective surfaces, covering windows with thick curtains and replacing mirrors with painted walls. They speak of the silver infection and distribute pamphlets warning against looking too long at still water or polished metal. Their efforts prove futile. Children born after the synchronization naturally perceive all timelines simultaneously, regarding their elders' desperate clinging to singularity with gentle compassion reserved for outdated thinking. The scientific community undergoes profound transformation. Quantum physicists and theoretical mathematicians suddenly find themselves understanding concepts previously beyond comprehension, as equations resolve themselves across multiple papers written decades apart. Archaeological discoveries reveal themselves as components of the original separation ritual. Artifacts previously misidentified, now clearly recognizable as tools for dividing what was once whole. Most remarkable is the transformation of St. Agnes itself. The building exists simultaneously as church, community center, and something entirely new, a synchronization hub where those struggling with multiple state existence can find guidance. Thomas Mainta's a constant presence there, though his form shifts between various guardians throughout history, each offering wisdom from their era of threshold stewardship. Global communications reflect this new dual consciousness. Television broadcasts show programs from multiple decades simultaneously, viewers naturally selecting which timeline's content to focus on based on their interests. Digital displays function as enhanced mirrors, revealing not just the physical world, but its underlying patterns and connections. I find myself drawn to the cemetery where Catherine Ellis was buried. Her headstone has transformed into a small reflecting pool, the surface showing not sky but countless iterations of her face, no longer trapped in asylum terror but serene in the vindication of her understanding. Next to her stone, empty plots gradually fill with markers for the 17 wedding guests, their dates of death listed identically, continuously present since 1897. Languages evolved to accommodate multiple state perception. New tenses emerge describing actions that simultaneously have happened, are happening, and will happen. Children develop intuitive grammar for experiences that transcend linear progression. Elderly scholars struggle to adapt their lifetime of sequential thinking to this restored reality. The most profound change comes in human relationships. Marriages encompass all potential versions of partners across timelines, allowing deeper understanding than previously possible. Family trees become complex lattices rather than branching diagrams, with connections forming across centuries through synchronized consciousness. As guardian catalyst, I observe from the threshold, neither fully immersed nor separate, maintaining the frequency that allows synchronization to continue its gentle spread across the world. The silver in my eyes marks not separation, but connection to all potential selves across the newly remembered wholeness of existence. The St. Agnes photograph now hangs in museums and private homes simultaneously, existing in multiple collections across decades without contradiction. Curators report that its frame remains cool to the touch regardless of ambient temperature, and viewers often depart with memories they hadn't possessed upon entering, weddings they attended across generations, ceremonies they'll witness in futures not yet manifested. My role as guardian catalyst continues to evolve. I maintain the perfect resonance between worlds through small, deliberate actions, placing orange blossoms at thresholds during equinoxes, writing the circular script on mirrors in public buildings, teaching children the old songs that help them navigate their multiplied existence. The silver in my eyes deepens with each passing season, reflecting not just this world, but all potential worlds now accessible through restored perception. Edwin Morley has found his own peace in synchronization. His consciousness, once trapped in the terrible moment of understanding what his camera had captured, now flows freely through the photographic record of human history. Museum visitors sometimes report helpful whispers when examining daguerreotypes, gentle guidance from the photographer who inadvertently preserved the perfect frequency of reunification. The obsidian mirror, now permanently part of my palm, serves as compass through this new reality. When touched to photographs, it reveals their hidden dimensions, the moments before and after capture, the thoughts of subjects, the alternate versions that might have been taken with slight adjustments of angle or timing. Through it, I've helped hundreds navigate their expanded awareness, particularly those who struggle with remembering too much at once. Miriam Holloway's descendants gather annually at St. Agnes, not to commemorate tragedy, but to celebrate their bloodline's culmination. Their genetically encoded mission, carried through generations of call-born daughters, fulfilled not in separation but in wholeness. They wear sapphire jewelry and orange blossoms, their silver eyes brightest among those who've embraced synchronization. Catherine Ellis has become something of a folk saint to those navigating multiple states of consciousness. Her asylum drawings, once dismissed as madness, now serve as meditation manuals for expanding perception. Children learn to trace her circular patterns with their fingers, while reciting the phrase she repeated in her final years, "The mirrors remember what we forgot." Thomas Aldridge no longer needs to arrange weddings between worlds. His purpose transformed from facilitator of exchanges to teacher of harmony, helping humans understand their expanded nature. He appears most often to those struggling with synchronization, his centuries of experience guiding them toward acceptance rather than resistance. The 17 wedding guests have become guides themselves, each specializing in different aspects of multiple existence. Eleanor Winters helps children navigate their dreams across timelines, while Judge Ellis's presence in courtrooms ensures justice considers all potential outcomes rather than binary guilt or innocence. Detective Marsh now investigates not crimes but synchronization anomalies, places where the reunification progresses unevenly or where those resistant to change create artificial barriers. Her merged consciousness allows her to perceive patterns invisible to those still adjusting, her silver eyes reflecting possibilities rather than fixed realities. The photograph that started everything continues its quiet work of revelation. Unlike ordinary images that capture single moments, it exists as a permanent bridge, not just documenting history, but actively participating in its remembrance across all possible iterations. The sapphire light that once pulsed through my veins has spread beyond me, a resonant frequency that connects all who embrace synchronization. Walking through town, I notice how the silver-eyed now outnumber those still struggling with singular perception. Even the most resistant have begun to display moments of dual awareness. Elderly men pausing mid-sentence as memories from alternate timelines surface. Skeptical scientists finding their notes mysteriously completed by future versions of themselves. Last evening I visited the university archives where my research began. The collection has transformed, documents existing in multiple states simultaneously. My original academic papers seamlessly merging with threshold guardian records spanning centuries. What was once a sterile repository now resembles a living organism, information flowing across temporal boundaries as researchers access knowledge from both past and future simultaneously. The photograph that started everything has begun reproducing itself in unexpected ways. People discover copies in family albums where none existed before, the wedding scene inserting itself into personal histories as the worlds continue merging. Each reproduction shows slight variations. Sometimes Miriam stands radiantly at the altar. Sometimes I occupy her position. Sometimes we are simultaneously the same person viewed from different angles of reality. Dreams have become communal experiences, with sleepers across town reporting shared nightscapes where St. Agnes serves as central gathering point. In these collective visions, the 17 wedding guests teach ceremonial dances that help participants harmonize their fragmented selves across timelines. Children wake remembering complex philosophical concepts beyond their years. Elderly dementia patients suddenly recall not just their past, but potential futures with perfect clarity. Yesterday, I encountered a young girl sitting on the St. Agnes steps, drawing Catherine's circular script with remarkable precision. When I asked where she learned the pattern, she looked up with eyes just beginning to silver and replied, "From myself when I'm older. I'll be a guardian too, just not yet." Her casual acceptance of her future role confirmed what I've suspected. The threshold guardianship now passes not through trauma, but through natural recognition across synchronized consciousness. The original separation wasn't malicious, but a necessary developmental stage, like a child who must learn to recognize their reflection as self before understanding their complete nature. Humanity needed to experience division before it could fully appreciate wholeness. The photographer's interruption was actually the precise moment when our collective consciousness had evolved enough to begin remembering its unified state. As twilight approaches, I stand before the altar where everything changed, the obsidian mirror in my palm humming with accumulated knowledge. Thomas appears beside me, his form shifting through all his historical iterations before settling into something new, a presence that exists in all possible versions simultaneously. The final phase approaches, he says, his voice resonating across multiple frequencies. Are you prepared to complete what began in 1897? I nod, understanding at last what the circular script has always been communicating. Not warnings or instructions, but a single question repeated across centuries. When all reflections merge, who will you choose to be? The answer, I realize, lies not in selecting one identity from many, but in embracing the unified wholeness we've always been. Tonight, they gather at St. Agnes for what the invitation calls a renewal of vows, though in truth it marks the final stage of synchronization. As guardian catalyst, I stand before the assembled congregation, silver-eyed residents beside those still clinging to singular perception, children who've never known separation alongside elders, still adjusting to remembered wholeness. The original photograph rests on the altar, no longer a static image, but a living portal. Within its borders, Miriam Holloway simultaneously falls and rises, collapses and stands tall, speaks with Catherine and whispers across centuries, all potential moments coexisting in perfect balance. The story of the interrupted wedding was never about tragedy, I tell them, my voice echoing through both the physical church and its mirrored counterpart. It was about patience, the careful preservation of the exact frequency needed for gentle reunification. Behind me, the threshold guardians from every generation form a semicircle. Thomas Aldridge, Reverend Stilwell, Edwin Morley, Dr. Chen, and countless others whose silver eyes reflect the accumulated wisdom of centuries. They no longer need to arrange exchanges or select brides. Their purpose now is simply to witness completion. The 17 wedding guests step forward, forming an inner circle around the photograph. Their synchronized movement creates ripples across the church floor, subtle waves of silver light that extend outward through doorways and windows. The photographer didn't interrupt anything, Eleanor Winters explains, her voice layered with all possible versions of herself. He captured the seed crystal around which our reunited reality could form. As twilight thickens into night, the walls of St. Agnes become transparent, revealing not darkness but the infinite mirror hall of the threshold realm, perfectly aligned with our world. The boundaries haven't dissolved, but harmonized, distinct yet unified, separate yet whole. I place my palm with its embedded obsidian mirror upon the photograph, completing the circuit of reunification. The image's surface ripples like disturbed water before settling into a new configuration, no longer showing chaos and fallen brides, but a gathering remarkably similar to our present assembly, spanning centuries of guardians and witnesses together in celebration. This isn't an ending, I tell them as silver light spreads from my fingertips across the gathered congregation. The photograph never captured a moment of interruption, but the beginning of remembrance. Outside, townsfolk report that every reflective surface, from shop windows to still puddles, briefly showed not their own reflections, but the interior of St. Agnes, as though the entire world glimpsed through the thin places Catherine once feared. In the days that follow, the acute symptoms of synchronization gradually normalize into a new equilibrium. Silver eyes become as common as brown or blue, threshold perception as natural as breathing. Children instinctively navigate multiple timelines while learning to ride bicycles. Elderly couples reminisce about weddings they've attended across centuries. The photograph that started everything now hangs in the town museum, its frame fashioned from mirrors salvaged from the hidden chamber beneath the altar. Visitors report that when viewed from different angles, it shows not one wedding, but many, each observer glimpsing the ceremony most meaningful to their own journey of reunification. I still trace Catherine's circular script each morning on reflective surfaces, not as warning or protection, but as gratitude for the patience of those who preserved the perfect frequency until humanity was ready to remember its wholeness. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.